Hey there, YouTube world. My name is Jeff Donlin. I'm making this video in a rebuttal to a Penn point made by one Mr. Penn Jillett, who's I want to say musician, but he's a magician. Thank you. A magician of some accomplishment, along with his assistant teller. And I like him. You know, he's a good guy. And as atheists go, you know, he's probably one of the nicest ones I've ever met. So I like him. I think his magic's really good, and he's a funny guy. And I agree with a lot of his libertarian politics. But I just wanted to rebut one of his Penn points about miracles. And he seems to imply that miracles by definition are something that's impossible, but that's not right. That's where his fallacy is that he makes a lazy assumption that he knows the definition of a miracle, and he didn't look it up. So let me just get that for you. Per dictionary.com, the definition of a miracle is, quote unquote, an effect or extraordinary event in the physical world that surpasses all known human or natural powers and is ascribed to a supernatural cause. The word impossible is not there. Supernatural is something that is, quote unquote, unexplainable by natural law or phenomena. That is, any known natural laws or phenomena. Okay, so it's not that it's impossible, it's just that it's something we don't understand yet. So we go, wow, it's a miracle. You know? So his point was that, like, you know, it's a miracle, so it's supposed to be impossible, so you're taking away the whole magicness or whatever of God by trying to explain your miracles because it's not supposed to be possible. So, but that's wrong. So I wrote this down so I could stay on point. You know, I'm going to go on and off point here a little bit, but anyway, every physical phenomena in the universe has a cause that is derived from some natural law. Just because a supernatural event occurs that humans do not understand how it happened does not mean that it is a physical impossibility. Even God has to obey his own physical laws, but he is able to manipulate these laws from the subatomic to the universal scale in ways that humanity will surely never be able to achieve. Now, this is all, I didn't get that from somewhere, I just came up with that myself, but I think it's right. And I think if you really listen to it, others would agree. Now, the miracles in the Bible are simply God employing natural laws and phenomena that humans did or do not yet know of to achieve his purposes. So it makes perfect sense that as humanity develops better understanding of the laws of nature and natural phenomena, that believers would try to figure out how God employed these natural laws and phenomena to achieve the miraculous events. There is no contradiction here of believers trying to understand these miraculous events. They are caused by real natural phenomena, and they can't, you know, there's nothing that's impossible. Anything that happened has to have been possible. Even God can't do the impossible. He's just doing stuff that we can't even begin to understand, but he's still using physical laws, his laws. Okay, so that pretty much rebuts his whole argument. But I'd like to go on because I came across that. He talked about it in terms of the Red Sea crossing. And I recently, you know, I look at stuff from time to time, and I go back and I got a couple clues, and I've come up with something I think is correct. And it's fascinating. I think this is going to blow the minds of a lot of believers and non-believers alike. So as far as the parting of the Red Sea is concerned, it was not parted in the manner that most people think of. The water was not physically divided by the wind exposing the sea floor. There is no way that a human could stand his ground, much less walk against a wind that is strong enough to hold back several hundred feet of water. Okay? There was no Cecil B. DeMille canyon of water exposing the sea floor. No, what really happened is the Israelis walked right across the surface of the sea on an ice bridge that was formed by a strong cold east wind that blew all the night. The Egyptians drowned when the ice melted in the morning while they were on it, and they sank to the bottom. Now that's the short version, and I'll support this all right now. When you consider that 500,000 people and their livestock needed to get across a 9-mile wide canyon that is 900 feet deep in only a few hours, it seems that it would be a mighty rough struggle for many of the elderly, young, and livestock to get up the sandy incline on the far side. Now, where I'm talking about is a place in the Gulf of Aqaba at Nuweiba Beach, and a gentleman by the name of Ron Wyatt, back in '78, they did dives there, and they found Egyptian chariots, coral encrusted now at this time, on the bottom of the sea. So, and there were pillars on either side that they're pretty sure, based on inscriptions that King Solomon had erected several hundred years afterwards. So you can look that up, and it looks pretty convincing. But anyway, they still think that the water blew out, exposed this land bridge. It would have had to remove 900 feet, which is just, no. So anyway, okay, so yeah, they had to get up the other side. They just wouldn't have made it in time. You know, you get down, you got to go down 900, back up, it's all sandy. And, you know, it's pretty, I'm on the beach here, and, you know, it's pretty tough just to walk on level ground on sand, let alone 900 feet up a couple miles. So a level path makes much more sense and is what the Bible text actually supports. The proper translation of the actual text does not say that there were actual vertical walls of water on either side, but that the water was like a wall to them. The root word of the Hebrew word for wall is to surround, as in a perimeter or barrier. Because walls are often used to surround things and make perimeters or barriers, it was written that the water was like a wall, not that it was an actual wall. The water fulfilled the same purpose as a wall, since it had them surrounded on either side, and it was a barrier to going in those directions, so the water was like a wall in function, but not in its actual form. They were on the frozen surface of the sea, and the liquid water was simply surrounding them like dual seashores on either side of a frozen ice bridge, and was a barrier where they could not go or walk. I'm only one page. I got like 4 more here. Okay, so the miracle was in the abnormally low temperature of the wind, its location, direction, and timing to freeze the surface of the sea in such a manner as to create an ice bridge from one shore to the other at the perfect moment to allow the Israelites to go across what we call today the Gulf of Aqaba on what they perceived as being quote-unquote dry ground. Remember that the event occurred at night and around the end of winter, which would help out with the low temperature. It was still pretty low even for that time of year, but you know, this is what it was, you know. So think about it. Living in or near Egypt their entire lives, the Israelites and Egyptians probably never saw a cube of ice, let alone an entire body of frozen water. So they had no idea what the material was. So the Exodus 14:21-22, and I'm using what's called Young's literal translation here for my source for biblical translation. Jehovah, that's God for those of you who don't know, Jehovah is another name for God, causeth the sea to go on by a strong east wind all the night, and maketh the sea become dry ground. And the waters are cleaved, and the sons of Israel go into the midst of the sea on dry land, and the waters are to them a wall on their right and on their left. The sea was literally transformed into dry ground by freezing it to ice. It was made into dry ground. The water became ice. It was frozen solid. Frozen is dry. You can be dry and frozen. And if it's solid, it's ground. So dry ground, they thought it was dry ground. Several biblical translations say that the wind caused the sea to go back, and in this one it says the wind caused the sea to go on. They are both the same thing. Here we have a major misunderstanding of the event. The Israelites were indeed seeing the sea recede or go back or go on, but again, it was not the sea floor that was being exposed. If you are standing on the shore watching a section of the sea before you turn to ice, it would not appear, or would it not appear, that the water was receding or going back or going on and being made into dry or solid ground. A rational reading of Exodus chapters 14 and 15, free of preconceived notions, will show that this is what actually must have happened. It even states that the waters began to turn, quote-unquote, turn back at the, quote-unquote, turning of the morning. In other words, the ice began to melt after the sun came up. 3 times in chapter 15, the Egyptians are described to have sunk or descended into the sea. So chapter 15, verse 4, chariots of Pharaoh and his force he hath cast into the sea, and the choice of his captains have sunk in the Red Sea. Verse 5, the depths do cover them. They went down into the depths as a stone. Verse 10, thou hast blown with thy wind, the sea hath covered them. They sank as lead in mighty waters. This wasn't no marsh just east of, the Nile or something. These were the mighty waters. They sank as lead. They didn't just, water came in up to their hips and, oh man, how are we going to get out of here? No, they sank like a stone, like lead. So, how are you cast into the sea or sink like a stone or as lead if you are already on the bottom? It doesn't make, these verses don't make sense if they were already on the sea floor and the water just came in on top of them. You can't be cast into if you're already down there. You can't sink if you're already on the bottom. They went from the top down. So it's clear that the Egyptians were on the surface of the sea. Okay, we got another. They were on. Oh shoot! It almost got away from me. So as the waters were turning back, they were being cast into the sea, quote unquote, horse, chariot, and rider completely. Exodus 14, verse 25. And Jehovah turneth aside the wheels of their chariots, and they lead them with great difficulty. And the Egyptians say, let us flee from the face of Israel, for Jehovah is fighting for them against the Egyptians. Verse 26. And Jehovah saith unto Moses, stretch out thy hand toward the sea, and the waters turn back on the Egyptians, on their chariots, and on their horsemen. And now for the money verse, verse 27. And Moses stretcheth out his hand towards the sea, and the sea turneth back at the turning of the morning to its perennial flow. And the Egyptians are fleeing at its coming, and Jehovah shaketh off the Egyptians, shaketh off the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. How do you shake something off if it's on the bottom already? So in chapter 20, in verse 25, we're told the Egyptians had a hard time steering their chariots. Think about it. The Israelites were standing on the far shore watching the Egyptians sliding all over the ice, out of control and possibly even sliding off the edge of the bridge into the sea, and so they thought that God had sabotaged the wheels of the chariots. In chapter 27 we read that the sea turneth back at the turning of the morning to its perennial flow. This one passage just amazing, chock full of meaning. For centuries people have thought of this turning back as a change of direction, that the water was returning to the space it had been before. This turning back was in fact the frozen water turning back into liquid water. The phrase turn back applies equally to a change of state of the water from a solid to a liquid as it does to a change of direction. The next phrase in chapter 27 says that this turning back occurred, quote unquote, at the turning of the morning. We are told in chapter 14:21 that the wind blew all the night. So between the cessation of the freezing wind and the radiant energy of the sun, the ice bridge began to melt or turn back. where I'm got, okay, or turn back into water, okay. Indeed, the next phrase states that the sea had turned back, quote-unquote, to its perennial flow. This is a very interesting statement in that it implies a metamorphosis of something from that which did not flow back into something that did flow. It was a metamorphosis from a solid to a liquid, from ice to water. It would not make sense to describe literal walls of water in this way, since they would still be of flowing liquid water. Moses even tells us that the water was frozen in chapter 15, verse 8. And by the spirit of thine anger have waters been heaped together, stood as a heap, have flowings, congealed, have been depths in the heart of the sea. Now the ice bridge was higher in the middle than at the edges, since it would have frozen along the center line first, and moved outward in both directions from there. Ice being less dense than water would have risen upwards as the buoyancy caused it to float. Because the center froze first and for a greater length of time, it would be thickest and highest there in the middle. Okay, we're making progress here. Okay, so highest in the middle and progressively less thick from there to the edge. This is what would have given the appearance of the sea receding or going back. So being higher in the middle and now floating, the once flowing water would look to have been congealed into a heap or a pile. The Hebrew word interpreted as congealed in this verse is defined as to thicken, condense, congeal, settle, become dense. It is also interpreted in other verses as hardened, stagnant, curdled, and dense. It does not seem that any word existed at that time to describe frozen water or ice. They had other, but not like a whole frozen lake. They had other words. But so in the King James, okay, I'll skip that. In any case, the water was congealed to the extreme of being solidified into a heap in the heart of the sea. Now there's another theory concerning ice that it formed two dams. This I heard first by a gentleman, Jonathan Gray. He's an Australian explorer, author, anthropologist, archaeologist. You know, he wrote some interesting stuff. And he was enlightened and open-minded enough to understand that this word congealed meant the water was frozen. He, like me, could not reconcile people being able to withstand such a wind as would be necessary to hold back hundreds of feet of water. He was, however, still stuck in the mental image of an actual separation of the water and thought that the water was held back by two massive dams of ice. Erroneously as that theory may have been, it was his basic observation that set me on the path to truth. That observation being that the water had been turned to ice in some fashion. So at Nuiba Beach, which is the spot on the Gulf of Aqaba where it looks like it took place, the crossing, even though there is and again that was by Ron Wyatt, a pretty extraordinary guy, and I recommend you searching his name and Red Sea Crossing, and there's other things even more amazing, but even though there's a relatively shallow underwater land bridge, quote unquote, the maximum depth of the water is still some 900 feet. Hoover Dam is 726 feet tall and 660 feet thick at its base. A concrete dam 900 feet tall would have to be almost 1,000 feet thick. An ice dam would have to be even thicker still. It is incredulous that a cold wind could, first of all, displace 900 feet of water to the bottom of the sea, and secondly, freeze water to a thickness of 1,000 feet or more. This is not even considering how the dam would be anchored across the 9-mile stretch. Also remember that the ice wants to float, and so would this ice dam. There's no way it could have stayed anchored to the sea bottom and water would have flowed underneath it. It would have just, it's not heavier than water. It wouldn't have just sat there. It would have wanted to float, go up like an iceberg, you know? And so then think about this also. And this goes against both theories there. If two 900-foot walls of water, whether they are ice or liquid, were to collapse and crash against each other, it would create a massive tsunami waves that would have sloshed all over the shorelines of the Gulf for miles around, sweeping the Israelites off the eastern shore in addition to engulfing the Egyptians. So if you got these two massive walls of water and then, okay, Moses, turn them back, and then whoosh, it's just gonna fly everywhere. It's gonna send waves out to the western and eastern side, and they'd still be 50, 100 feet or more tall. You know, it would have just wiped them out. So right there, that one point just blows it all away. Nobody ever thought of that. I mean, really, I'm the first person that thought of that. I mean, come on, somebody had to have. But anyway, so in contrast, the surface of the sea, getting back to the ice bridge now, the surface of the sea would only be required to be frozen to a thickness of as little as 4 inches for it to support a person, and it was probably thicker since it had to support the weight of the livestock that weighed more and have smaller feet, probably maybe 8 to 12 inches thick. And you know, because they're a bit bigger, you know, like a cow or whatever, it's, you know, got those hooves, their weight's more, there's just more pressure on the bottom of their feet, so there's more stress in the ice, and it would have had to have been thicker. And coming down the home stretch here, so it's likely the ice was not clear and solid the whole way through, but had more of a frothy white quality to it on top. Something like shaved ice, but more foamy from being whipped up by the wind. In fact, it probably looked and felt a lot like sand when it was walked on. So the Israelites had seen plenty of white sand on their journey through the wilderness of the Red Sea. You know, so to them, you know, they've been walking through the whole, what's now called the Sinai Peninsula, but was then the wilderness of the Red Sea. And you know, it's just more white sand to them. They, you know, they're in a hurry. They got to get the hell away from Pharaoh. Who's going to reach down and say, "What the hell is this shit?" You know, they're just going to get the hell out of there. Excuse my shoot, darn it. I didn't say that. So then the last point, you know, the cold wind. The Bible never says it was cold, but so I wondered that too. But you have to take yourself out of your, you know, couple thousand years removed from the whole thing, and you know, place yourself in the shoes of the Israelites here. You know, how would you be feeling if all of Pharaoh's army had you trapped and nowhere to go? You'd be pretty pumped. You know, you're thinking we're all about to get wiped out, and we're trapped up against the water, and there's Pharaoh's army, and so you're pumping. The adrenaline's going, man. And so you know, you would think that with so much adrenaline, you're not going to feel that freezing wind. In fact, that freezing wind's probably going to feel like a cool, refreshing breeze at that point. So, you know, maybe that's why it was never described as being that cold, because they were just so amped up that their bodies burning so hot from the excitement and the adrenaline that to them it didn't really feel that cold. So that's my theory on that, but there you go. I mean, check it out. Exodus chapters 14, 15. Sank like a stone as lead. You know, the steering of the wheels, they're all over the ice. You know, and just the other things about, you know, the whole ridiculousness of going down 900 feet and up the other side, up the sandy incline in just a couple hours, and then also how it turned back at the turning of the morning when the sun came out. That right there, I mean, there's so many things that all by themselves could do it, but there's 5, 6, 7, 8 things all in conjunction pointing to an ice bridge. So there you have it. There's the miracle of the Red Sea crossing and how the waters were parted. They were parted, but it was parted by an ice bridge. There was water on one side, water on the other, a bridge, dry land, ice down the middle. So there you have it. My name is Jeff Donlin. I am the Plane Observer. Have a nice day.